Hey, good morning and good afternoon, and welcome to Operation Ukrainian Safe Haven, Innovative Practices in Housing. My name is Bahar Taheri, and I'm the project consultant working on this project, and I'll be your host for today. As the Canadian Immigrant Settlement Sector Alliance, we acknowledge that Canada is part of Turtle Island and is the homeland of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations who have stewarded this land since time immemorial. I am joining you from the unceded traditional territory of the Coquitlam First Nations, which lies within the shared territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Katzie, Musqueam, Kakite, Squamish, and Stolo nations. It's important for me to acknowledge the lands that I'm privileged to live, work, and raise my son on as a way of showing respect and honoring the Indigenous peoples of these lands. Acknowledgement for me is a simple way of resisting the erasure of Indigenous histories and working towards honoring and inviting the truth. We would like to acknowledge that we are funded by Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada. So thank you for this funding for this project. So Operation Ukrainian Safe Haven administered a questionnaire nationally for submissions for projects and initiatives that organizations and stakeholders undertook to welcome displaced Ukrainians to Canada and share their innovative practices. 69 organizations and stakeholders provided submissions highlighting their projects and initiatives nationally. The projects requested focus on 3 areas: housing, employment, local immigration partnerships, community building, and smaller centers. Our focus today is the theme area of housing. So in today's webinar, we will hear from a small, select number of organizations who have participated in settling newcomer Ukrainian families nationally. Today's speakers will share about their project, the outcomes, and innovative practices, and then we will have time for a Q&A session with our speakers, as I mentioned earlier. We would like to highlight that many organizations have submitted outstanding projects and initiatives and have been and are still doing the important work of welcoming and settling newcomer displaced Ukrainian families to communities across Canada. However, not all could be featured in today's webinar given our time constraints. We would like to encourage you to go to our website where all the projects and initiatives have been submitted, have been posted. We will share the link in the chat box. Currently, the English webpage is available, and by next week, the French webpage will also be available. And then today we have 4 presentations from organizations across Canada. They are from British Columbia, we have Success. From Ontario, we have the City of Toronto. From Manitoba, New Journey Housing, and from Ontario, we have Costi. So without further ado, we'll start with our first presentation. I'd like to introduce Ryan Drew, Director of Integrated Services for Newcomers from Success in British Columbia. So over to you, Ryan.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you, Bahar, for inviting us to talk about our pilot project called Operation Welcome Home. As Bahar said, I'm the Director of Integrated Services for Newcomers at Success, and we sort of have numerous different programs that I'll touch on briefly, but I've had the pleasure and opportunity to work within the sector for the last 24 years. And I am just, so excited to see all the amazing things that are happening so far in our sector in response to all of these movements of folks within our country. I am also joining from the same territory that Bahar already acknowledged, and I do acknowledge that we are here and that we need to continue to recognize and uplift the stewards of these lands that have been here since time immemorial. So let me tell you a little bit about Success. So we're actually celebrating our 50th anniversary this year. Our organization was started, in a grassroots way by, a really small group of community members that really sort of came together because they wanted to help more recent immigrants settle in the region. And so we're now 50 years later from that initial initiative, and we're just so excited to continue on with that work. In terms of our vision, we really see a vibrant Canadian society where people thrive and contribute to inclusive communities. And our mission is really to empower people on their Canadian journey to achieve their goals through services and advocacy that promote belonging, wellness, and independence. So just a quick overview of sort of the scope of what we're doing. We are one of the largest newcomer social service agencies in Canada. We are celebrating our 50th anniversary, and in the last fiscal, so not in our current fiscal because we're not quite done yet, we served over 73,000 unique clients in 50 different languages, and they accessed over 123,000 services. So what we do, has a huge impact, and we're so excited to be part of that. We have 40 service locations across British Columbia. In other parts of Canada, we have an office in Toronto, as well as in China and Korea. And we have a very large, diverse, multicultural staff composition. There's over 900 of us, and our annual budget is over $58 million. And we kind of touch on three main areas. We have our integrated services for newcomers, which is my portfolio. We have affordable housing and culturally appropriate seniors care. So that just sort of gives you a sense of the scope of our agency. Okay, so let's get into this. What are we looking at? We are providing our services within a world context. There are so many reasons why folks come to Canada, and especially those who are displaced. And those can be because of protracted conflicts, natural disasters, political unrest, and persecution. We know this, and we've seen very specific initiatives and commitments from the federal government over the last couple of years. In particular, for Afghan refugees, the government committed to bringing 40,000 GARs into the country. Of course, with creating a Hewitt pathway for Ukrainians, escaping the war in Ukraine. And most recently, allowing Iranian folks to more easily extend their visas within Canada so that they can stay longer, which, really shows the commitment of the government to help out in this sort of world context of what's happening. And we know that even with these initiatives, it's not going to be the only folks and other things that are going to happen. Now, in Metro Vancouver, we have, it's not unique to Metro Vancouver, but I'm going to talk from a Metro Vancouver perspective, that we're welcoming all of these newcomers, in the midst of a housing shortage. In Metro Van, we have the highest rents in Canada. We're seeing unprecedented numbers of arrivals at YVR, and also through folks choosing secondary migration from other parts of Canada as well. Plus, as we've all experienced, increasingly higher cost of living, and overall Vancouver has one of the highest in the country. So within this context, it becomes increasingly more difficult to help support those who have experienced forced migration or a refugee experience. So what are these initial steps upon arrival? Well, of course, we have landings of GARs, PSRs, and Hewitt visa holders, and they need some sort of shelter. So they might go to the Welcome House, or they may have sponsors, or they could have family and friends that are supporting them, or in the case, they might have temporary hotel stay as well. Of course, they need to have needs assessment conducted. We're looking at, how can we support their finances? How can we help them find permanent housing? Are their documents in order? Do they need employment and education? All of these things are just happening on those initial first steps. And here's just, we do provide arrival services for folks, and these are just a few photos of the work that we've done and the people that we've seen. So we have kiosks and booths set up at YVR to be able to make those first contacts and get people connected. So this is where Operation Welcome Home comes in. So this is a pilot project that we started in early summer of last year, and it has continued to grow and expand. And so this is what I'm going to be talking about more specifically today. So how did it all start? Well, it really starts with working with developers. So this is about raising their awareness of the need for housing, but especially their awareness of the folks that are being displaced elsewhere and are coming to our country for safety and for, kind of restarting their lives. And then from there, it's really sort of establishing partnerships with those developers, making sure that they have confidence in our agency, confidence in our program, and knowing that they can do something good for the community that they are working in and in the communities where they are developing. And so through those partnerships, we're able to then increase or make available an inventory of underutilized and unoccupied spaces. And this is where our program comes in. And these are just a few of the houses that we have just recently onboarded. Okay, so preparing our donated homes. So there are lots of things that we need to consider when we're bringing these properties on board. It's really about categorizing them. So what does that mean? It can mean that there are two ways that these homes can kind of be used. Are the developers wanting to rent the spaces themselves? Okay, great. We can help refer clients to them and get them settled over there. Or are these developers not wanting to rent these spaces, but they don't want them to sit idle? And so that is where we devote most of our efforts. So what we do is we sign an MOU with the developers, and they donate that space to us and allow it for our program use. And so from there, we're able to put them into our inventory, be able to categorize them. Like, so basically, like, how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms, do they have laundry, what other sort of things are included in this space. And then we can track them. So we can put them in our inventory list and then see when they are going to be online and when they need to be offline. And I'll talk about that in a minute. And then it allows us to start looking for families to help match them to these units. Of course, we need to do inspections. We're inspecting for safety. We're inspecting for things that are broken. We're inspecting, for potentially junk removal as well. So we have to look at the conditions of the homes. Sometimes when developers gain possession of those homes, they're not really suitable for habitation. And we really want to, sort out those people really quick and get those off. We do not want people there. We then go in and make minor repairs if they're needed. We dispose of large items. We prep the units so that they're feeling welcoming for the families. We get them professionally cleaned. And then we start the families that we have identified that would be a good fit for that unit. We start doing viewings to see if this is a home that they want to stay in. And from there, we match the families to those spaces. And then these are just some photos. You can see these are older homes. They're, kind of that sort of 70s, 60s vibe. So nothing special, but definitely a nice warm place to settle down. Okay, so working with clients for move-in. So once we've matched clients to the homes and they're interested, then we intake the clients. We have a program participation agreement that we review with them, because we really have to emphasize that this is temporary housing and that we are there to support them, but that when the developers need to regain possession of those units, they need to have an alternate space available. And that's where we come in. They're not doing this alone, but we're there to help support them in their permanent housing search. We then arrange a move-in date and we connect them with resources and donors so that they can have low or no cost furniture, household items, and other things that, linens and such that they might need for their space. And here are some pictures of some of the families that we are currently helping. Okay, so while they're participating in our program, we provide support. So we do not provide settlement services ourselves because we do not want to duplicate service, but we connect people to settlement services. We connect people to employment supports. Here in BC, we have our Work BC program that's provincially funded. So we connect them to Work BC and all the supports that are there. We provide housing education for them. What does the housing market look like here in BC? What is the Residential Tenancy Act? What kind of frauds or scams should they be looking out for? The education piece is super important. Our team then establishes a housing search plan with them. So what communities are they looking to move into? What are the needs for their family? What are their goals? How much of a cap on the amount of rent they can afford? What does that look like? So we help establish that with them. Plus, we help connect them with community. So, grassroots organizations, cultural groups like UCC, Maple Hope, these are really important pieces to help support those folks to get settled and to start building up their networks. Now, of course, it's short-lived. Okay, so these are temporary housing options for them. So we need to work with them to move out. So once we've established their plan, then we can identify and help them view units for permanent houses. We can help support the liaison piece with landlords and help to raise landlords' awareness of the situation and help build their confidence to be willing to rent to this group of people. And then again, connecting them to resources and volunteers to help them move. Maybe they still need other furniture or items in their new space. Helping connect them to the community that they're going to be moving into. Now, of course, there are lots of risk management and mitigation strategies that you have to keep in mind. So, definitely relationships and partnerships are key. Having that trust and building up those warm networks are incredibly important. The end of life for these units, when the developers needs to reclaim those units because they're going to be demolished and break ground, we need to have found homes for the folks that are in those spaces. So it's a big risk for us, but it's a big commitment from our side to be able to move folks along into more permanent solutions. Now, of course, there are optics for the public. We do not want folks to think that we are taking away from the housing stock that's available for other people. The great thing with our project is that we are utilizing spaces that would otherwise remain empty. And of course, safety of our clients is paramount. And so making sure to inspect the properties initially for health and safety purposes, but then the ongoing inspections and ongoing repairs and ongoing check-ins to make sure that the space continues to be a safe place for these folks. And ultimately, our takeaways is that we need to have an overall strategy for well, for housing overall, but for settlement sector in particular. So how are we going to continue to create communities that have absorptive capacity for these arrivals? And we really need to have proactive planning to make sure that that is implemented and in place. All of this really requires permanent funding to ensure that there are staff that have expertise and time to focus on this work with our clients. We need to continue to look for donations, whether they're cash donations or donations of furniture, items, clothing, to help support these folks get established is super important. We need to leverage the community, you know, connecting with the cultural organizations, the grassroots organizations, the public, you know, to basically establish that this is an all of society effort. It can't just be on the settlement sector. And then finally, building those relationships are incredibly important to be able to work with developers, to work with key stakeholders and municipalities, with other organizations, and with our funders at IRCC as well. And I want to say thank you. My contact information is there if you want to learn more about our project, and or if you just have more questions.
Thank you, Ryan. That was a great presentation. We do have one question so far. So it's just wondering, do the families living in the temporary housing units have to pay rent to Success?
So they do provide program fees. So it's not rent, but it's definitely much lower than the rental market rate here. And why is that? So that helps to pay for the utilities for the space. It helps to pay for the maintenance and inspections that are there. There, of course, are like property taxes, and you know, other things that like we have to pay for the cleaning fees and this sort of thing. So it helps cover off some of those costs that we see on a regular basis.
Okay, and then have there been any challenges with moving families from the temporary housing to permanent housing that you can talk about? Like, how do you make that happen?
Yeah, no, for sure. You know, it's always, you know, a challenge, but again, it's about really building up the capacity of the families that are in that are within the program. You know, we do also have, you know, we give ourselves some wiggle room. So for example, if the developers tell us we need the property October 31st, we're going to only have an agreement with the families until the end of September, which gives us like 1 month sort of buffer in case they're not, you know, we're not able to work together to find another solution. So that's one of the mitigating strategies we have. Another strategy is that if we can't find a permanent housing, do we have another temporary housing location coming on board that we could then transition them into? You know, so again, at least extending them within the program at a different property so that they're still not occupying the space that needs to be given back to the developer.
You mentioned that you look for families that are a good fit. What are some of the criteria you factor in when providing someone access to this temporary housing?
Yeah, so for example, if we have like, okay, we actually have one of our new properties. It actually had a basement suite as well as, you know, an upper suite for the house. The upper suite is huge. It has like 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and the space itself is actually very big. The basement suite is only a studio, so there is no bedroom. And so, you know, obviously I'm not going to put a family of 6 in a studio apartment. This doesn't make a sense, right? So we were actually able to identify an extended family. It was actually a family of 6. So the family of 5 are taking the upper unit, and they have an adult son who is taking the basement suite. And so it actually, for us, we thought it was nice because they could still live kind of together, but the adult son would have, you know, their own privacy and independence from their other family. But it's really more, so one of the criteria is, does the size of the family meet the size of the unit? So we don't want to put too big of a family in a small unit, and we don't want too small of a family in a big unit. So it's taking a look at that. We're also looking at, you know, their ability to maintain the program fees. So we don't want to put them in a precarious position where they're unable to, you know, do that on a regular basis. Because one of the other outcomes for participants in the program is that we can be a reference for them you know, for when they're looking at renting properties later. We can also, they can build up their credit history here, you know, and we can confidently say, like, yes, they participated in our program, they were able to pay their fees every month without any problem. That looks great. We want to set them up for success. We don't want to put them in a position where you know, it's going to be problematic down the line.
And for newcomers, that's like one of the biggest things, having reference and showing that, you know, all that credit kind of check type stuff. So that's really great. And then we have another question. How do families apply to this program? Are they like referred in by other organizations? Can they apply themselves if they've heard about it? How does it work?
Yeah, so I mean, anyone can be referred or connect with us. Currently, um, the majority of the families we've been working with are ones that are staying in the federally and provincially funded hotel. Because in BC, we actually have two sets of hotels that the arrivals are staying at. And so one of our goals is to try to move people out of the hotel system as fast as possible so that those rooms are available for the new folks that are coming in. So, so the majority of the people that we've been working with are staying at the hotel, but we have had like other folks in the community say, like, hey, you know, we have a really perfect family for that space. Because sometimes, you know, like at one point we had a space that was quite large, and all of the families that we were working with were like couples or a family of three, and we were like, oh geez, you know, this isn't working. And so then we, you know, kind of spread out the word within our network to say, like, hey, are you working with, you know, a family that's about this size? And we were able to make a good match that way.
Great. I don't see any other questions, but I believe you shared your contact information, and you can also put it in the chat box. So if folks do have more questions that pop up later, or they want to try this out in their organization or in their region, then they can contact you. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us. And the project sounds amazing. Great, there it is. And this is so great. Like, the work that you're doing is amazing. So I'm happy we were able to hear about it and feature it in today's webinar. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Bye. Okay, so next up, we'll go to our second speakers, second group, actually. Our second group is from the City of Toronto in Ontario. We have Nicole Watson, Acting Manager of Toronto Newcomer Office, Maruna Abbas Estefanos, Community Development Officer at the Toronto Newcomer Office, and Sarah Hickman, Manager, Corporate Initiatives, Strategic Initiatives, CAO's Office, the Regional Municipality of Durham. So I will hand it over to you all to take over.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for the introductions. And so I will be speaking first, and we'll be rotating through our speakers. So my name is Nicole Watson. I'm the acting manager of the Newcomer Office. As sort of we begin, I just wanted to also acknowledge that we are joining from Toronto, Ontario, which is the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe and the Chippewa, as well as the Haudenosaunee and the Tlingit peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people. And we also wanted to acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. At the City of Toronto, we also like to acknowledge all treaty peoples, including those who came here as settlers or migrants in generations past, such as my family, especially those who came involuntarily, particularly those brought to the lands as part of the transatlantic slave trade. So also paying tribute to those ancestors of African origin and descent. We will be talking to you today about the City of Toronto Refugee Resettlement Program. This is a program coordinated by the Toronto Newcomer Office as part of the city's ongoing work to welcome large-scale arrivals. And of course, given today's theme is around housing, we'll be focusing in particular on our housing efforts to ensure accommodation for Ukrainian arrivals. And these efforts actually involved a project that was coordinated across 6 neighboring municipalities in the Greater Toronto Area. So Toronto, Durham, Peel, Halton, Hamilton, and York region. And Sarah, who will be talking a little later, is actually from Durham region and was part of that partnership. If I could get the next slide, please. So to start with some general background information, since February of 2022, over 129,000 Ukrainians have arrived to Canada, with approximately 50% of those arrivals landing in Ontario. As of March, in 2022, Canada had received a number of applications and visa approvals. And we know that a high number of Ukrainian nationals have arrived in Canada without accommodation plans in place or the ability to immediately secure housing. Ukrainian community in Toronto is actually quite robust. There's about 70,000 strong, with a number of existing associations and also local support networks. So we knew that this would make Toronto an appealing destination for many. And I think the same goes for the Greater Toronto Area. If I could get the next slide. Keeping this in mind, the City of Toronto decided to reactivate the Refugee Resettlement Program in the spring of 2022. This program was actually first approved by City Council in October of 2015 in relation to Syrian refugee resettlement. And it's intended to help facilitate the coordination and communication at a local and regional level to address urgent needs of those fleeing conflict in Ukraine and arriving in Toronto. The Toronto Newcomer Office is a citywide local immigration partnership. We are largely funded by Immigration, Citizenship, and Refugee Canada, and we lead the implementation of the program at the City of Toronto level. And it involves a number of different response activities and components, which you'll see outlined on this slide. So there is intergovernmental engagement, information sharing, and outreach. We also coordinate a number of teams and task force that meet to streamline communications and planning. And we also work to collaborate among key organizations in the Ukrainian community. One of the important pieces is identifying gaps in settlement supports and ways to address them. And this is really a proactive approach to ensuring successful settlement. I'm going to go into this a little bit more on the next slide, if I could move to that. In terms of addressing known gaps, we have some outlined here on the slide in relation to Ukrainian arrivals and response efforts. So these include working to extend eligibility for subsidized childcare through the Refugee Resettlement Program. We also work to get expansion of the Fare Pass, which is the City of Toronto's transit discount program, having that extended to Ukrainian arrivals as well. Toronto Employment and Social Services, which is the division in the city that delegates out Ontario Works, also was able to provide individuals and families with access to medical benefits and assistance to facilitate moves into more affordable housing through intensive case management services. And as many of us here know, one of the biggest hurdles that Ukrainian arrivals have been facing was access to accommodations, and especially given the housing crisis that's currently being experienced within the GTA. And this is really why the GTHA regional response has become such a critical component of the City of Toronto's Refugee Resettlement Program in response to Ukrainian arrivals. So I'm actually going to pass it over now to Sarah from Durham region, who will speak to the GTHA partnership in more detail.
Thanks, Nicole. And hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here and share some information about the GTHA regional response. And I will share that GTHA stands for the Greater Toronto and Hamilton Area. Sorry, Nicole, I don't recall if you mentioned that. But here on slide 4, I'd like to share that beginning in April 2022, a group of partners, the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area, the GTHA area, and partners already mentioned, but I will repeat, regions of Durham, York, Peel, Halton, and of course as well the cities of Toronto and City of Hamilton. So we came together to share information and to coordinate as much as possible our response to supporting Ukrainian arrivals in Canada who were finding themselves in the GTHA, mainly through accessing airport support services at Toronto Pearson International Airport. And so together as this group, we've worked really well as great partners in responding to what was, of course, an acute and emergent need in our communities, and we continue to do this today. So the Government of Canada's introduction of the Canada-Ukraine Authorization for Emergency Travel and the accompanying temporary resident permit in Canada prompted this coordinated response, as we are finding that many individuals arriving from Ukraine and into Canada were arriving without housing and accommodations and with very little resources or connections in Canada, as has been mentioned. And essentially, we're at great risk of becoming precariously housed or homeless. And so I should add, at the start of the war, and when we began to see individuals and families arriving in Canada, individuals arriving through that Canada-Ukraine Authorization for Emergency Travel were not eligible for provincial or federal services and supports like other populations of immigrants and refugees would be eligible for. So thankfully, this did change in time, providing some support for those arriving with little to no resources, and really for anybody who is eligible for those services and supports. So understanding all of this, which is risks associated to those arriving without supports, and primarily housing, and understanding that we could see an influx of individuals and families into our shelter systems, which across the GTHA are very much already at capacity, or in some cases over capacity. So GTHA partners knew that it was critical to convene and coordinate our efforts. So some objectives listed here, which are fairly obvious, but to provide temporary and emergency accommodations to those arriving without housing and connections in Canada. Also providing those at risk with secure and healthy living environments and protection from a number of risks. And facilitating links with key settlement services and other supports in our communities, especially in those early days following their arrival. Next slide, please. So across the GTHA, there are different approaches because the conditions and the capacity for the type and the scope of response has differed slightly across our municipalities and our regions. Some have activated accommodation sites in post-secondary education residences when they were available in the summertime, and as well as in hotels with on-site wraparound settlement services and other supports. And again, this is key because those initial days are critical to successful settlement. Also, a range of critical services and supports have been made available to individuals and families to transition primarily to longer-term housing situations, as well as to employment and to schools, really to settle successfully in our communities. Other regions and municipalities have delivered emergency shelter when the need would arise in communities, and then others have also provided transitional housing support. So as I mentioned, one of the goals was to prevent individuals and families arriving from Ukraine from becoming precariously housed and homeless, and from entering the shelter system, which is already at or over capacity, and not necessarily responsive to the needs of immigrants who have fled war and have experienced great trauma, and in many cases, at points in time, not eligible for other government supports and services. So this approach also worked to provide coverage across the GTHA and not to create any unsustainable needs in any one location. And a final note here, I would say this response currently this response and actions continue to be funded by municipalities and regions that are involved and offering these supports. GTHA partners, we have advocated for support from the federal and provincial governments for these efforts and our programs in our communities. And so we continue to advocate as partners in settlement and in welcoming immigrants to our communities. Nicole, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I'm actually going to hand it over to Morona to take us through the next portion.
Thanks, Nicole. Next slide, please. Perfect, thank you. So just continuing from what Sarah has shared so far, this slide really provides a simplified and high-level version of how Ukrainian arrivals have entered the GTHA sites. The process, of course, as Sarah explained, is a bit more nuanced, but we wanted to provide a high-level visual to hopefully contextualize some of the information that has been shared so far. So just as a reminder, the GTHA response implemented has been introduced as a measure of last resort. So just to quickly walk us through the process, Ukrainian arrivals do enter Canada, those without an accommodation plan in place. Individuals and families are first to access all federally funded housing options related to Ukrainian arrivals prior to a referral to one of the GTHA temporary accommodation sites. So that includes the Amex Federal 14-day hotel accommodation and currently the Overflow 3 to 5 day hotel supports being provided through Red Cross. And once they've exhausted all federal options, then they will either move to longer term housing or a referral would be made to one of the GTHA sites. So initially referrals came mainly from the Canadian Red Cross when they were located at Pearson Airport managing the reception and registration services. But when QES took over, registration and referrals, referrals are now mainly coming from them. Referrals are also received from the SPOs, the service providers at the federal hotel sites, as well as local service providers. So I just want to highlight that there are multiple referral pathways into the GTHA sites. Sarah already kind of highlighted this, but these, because these sites are municipally operated, there are some slight differences to the approach. So that includes the number of rooms available, services and supports on site. And as was shared, some regions have utilized post-secondary spaces when they were available and provided access to some of their shelter supports. So there are some differences across the GTHA. So just kind of highlighting some of the really great outcomes that have come out of the GTHA partnership. So over 2,000 individuals from over 837 households have accessed emergency accommodation and services through the GTHA partnership. And since October of 2022, the vacancy rate has been less than 10% and really demonstrating the significant need for emergency accommodation support. Families have been connected to a number of community supports through the provision of things such as itinerant services. 621 families, or which translates to about 1,626 individuals, were able to find longer term accommodation in an average of about 4 to 5 weeks, which is approximately half the average time that families would stay in the base municipal shelter system. Kind of shifting things to a bit more local outcomes. So in Toronto, the Toronto site has a block of about 70 rooms and has provided emergency accommodation to over 506 individuals from over 204 households. And since September of 2023, the vacancy rate at the Toronto site has been between 0 to 3%. So really just giving you a sense of the flow of arrivals moving through the site. Also, just kind of overall, the GTHA regional partnership, or the operation, really has highlighted the important role municipalities play in advancing the successful settlement and integration of newcomer communities. And just sharing some of the key learnings from the City of Toronto's overall response efforts. So establishing an internal and external table has really demonstrated success in the coordination of information sharing and mobilizing resources. And as I think a few other individuals have shared, while Ukrainian arrivals have similar needs as refugees, their immigration status as temporary residents, particularly for those that are coming under the SWET program, really creates limitations with access to certain provincial, federal, and municipal services. So it really has made it critical to bring together community and government partners to really coordinate the key supports that are needed for this vulnerable group. In addition, promoting partnerships across government levels and with community agencies has really enhanced the City of Toronto's ability to stay informed and really up to date on trends, issues, and the needs of arrivals, while also sharing information back into the community. So that reciprocal information sharing. Specifically as it relates to the GTHA partnership, having the GTHA collaboration really ensured that there was a coordinated and consistent approach across the GTHA region, and really the responses facilitated a balanced approach without overburdening one city or region. And the GTHA model, what we recognize is also scalable and adaptable and can be replicated for future events such as this, similar to this. But what Sarah also highlighted is that what we also recognize is that funding is needed for municipalities, to be able to mobilize quickly and not have their base shelter system severely impacted. And lastly, we've recognized that if the SWEP program is extended, which we hope it is, the need for, temporary accommodation is likely to stay the same or most likely increase. So something that we do definitely need to keep in mind. So just this slide is just showcases some of the testimonials and feedback that we received or have been provided by staff and Ukrainian arrivals. And just to highlight a couple, one is that on-site supports addressed the most urgent needs and allowed for available resources to be utilized for life stabilization. And another is that this was from a Ukrainian arrivals. They were grateful for the opportunity to have stable emergency housing support during their settlement integration process. And that is our presentation.
Great, thank you so much. We do have some questions and comments. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm gonna limit the questions. I'll just start with the first question. So when families arrive right at the airport, is this team and this project involved with providing them with the resources right at the airport, or how does that work?
So the GTHA response, as shared, is a last resort. So we're not directly at the airport, but the Canadian Ukrainian Immigrant Aid Society is at the airport, and they're also the ones managing referrals to the 14-day Amex stay and also the GTHA sites. So once a family has gone through the 14-day stay, then they have the ability to be referred to a site that has rooms available. Sorry, now you're muted.
Okay. And then once the families are in the hotels, and they stay there for about 2 weeks, correct? Do they have settlement supports once they get to the hotel? And then how does that work?
So for the GTHA sites, they're not capped at 2 weeks. They stay until they're able to move on to longer term accommodation. And as Sarah had mentioned, each site has a different set of support services attached to them. So Toronto specifically, there are settlement workers that do support the individuals that are staying at that site. There's also translation services, there's child minding. So it's a very robust a number of services and supports that are provided to this family. They're connected to Ontario Works. So we really want to make sure all the systems are connected and that these families are connected as best as possible. Sarah, I definitely want to give you some space to share a little bit about Durham as well.
Yeah, no, Marona, you covered it in terms of the GTHA sites that are operational. But I think the question was also asking about the 14-day stay. And so those federal sites where individuals and families may be placed directly from the airport. So it's my understanding that yes, there are limited settlement services and supports available during those 14 days. That wasn't always the case. So I did see a comment in the chat here that referenced, limited services and support. So it could have been depending on when that 14-day stay happened. But just to reiterate what Marona has mentioned already, our sites run by GTHA municipalities and regions do have a pretty broad range of settlement and other services available to individuals and families that are staying with us on our sites.
Okay, great. So it's okay. Yeah, I was wondering about the 14-day and how that all works. Okay, and then last question, only because we're time limited here. What is the transition between the hotel to a rental unit? Like what's the supports that are offered? Is there like an employment letter provided? How do you go about that?
So we have housing support workers that are connected to the clients to provide them with the support that they need to locate affordable housing. So I wouldn't say a letter necessarily would be provided, but they're connected to the appropriate supports to kind of help them secure housing. And then they're also connected to Ontario Works to see if there's any sort of financial benefits, such as like the Housing Stabilization Fund, that would be available to them to be able to support their transition. So those are, we really focus on making those connections and not also duplicating the services that are currently available.
Okay, did anyone else want to jump in or no? Let's see. Okay. Great. And if you all could provide your contact information, so if folks, their questions didn't get answered, their comments didn't get answered, maybe they can connect with you directly and kind of continue the conversation. But thank you so much for being here today. It's definitely an innovative practice as far as BC is concerned for a municipal government to kind of have a program that's welcoming displaced persons. So it's pretty cool to learn about. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I will move on to our next group of speakers. We have Cody Gunther, Executive Director, and Mikhailo Ivanov, Housing Advisor from New Journey Housing, which is based in Manitoba. So take it away.
Yeah, we are a housing resource center for newcomers to Canada. Our goal is to train newcomers about the housing process here in Winnipeg and Manitoba. And we're helping them through connecting them with landlords and helping them with finding housing. So when we first started, we have been seeing about 20 to 30 families a month. And then starting in April and May 2022, that bumped up to between 100 and 200 families a month. So we knew that we had to pivot a little bit in order to adjust to the high number of clients that we were seeing. Thanks, Mahalo. And one of the big things in Manitoba is that we had the reception center located at the hotels where the Ukrainians were staying. It's a little bit different here. They're allowed to stay in the provincial hotels for 30 days. So I know a lot of talk recently has been about 14, but we are very fortunate to have provincial support for folks to stay for 30 days. In that time, we set up an office, air quote office, at the hotel, at the reception center, with other community partners that were providing support to the Ukrainians. There we met with clients one-on-one that were living in a hotel, and also with families that were living maybe with some family members in another part of Winnipeg. They could also come to the hotel for these supports. And then at that time, we would learn about their budget, family size, and then set up viewings for apartments. When Ukrainians started arriving, we actually had a lot of private landlords and companies reach out to us and tell us about their housing units that they had available. A lot of them agreed to waive the need for rental references and co-signers. So we had a very elaborate Excel spreadsheet where we would put all that information, location, area, and then that's what we would go to a lot of the time when we were helping clients to set up viewings. And one of the most important things that we did was we had to hire more staff. And we had, again, support from the province to hire, at one time we had 3 staff that could speak Ukrainian and actually went through this process themselves. So it was really great to have their firsthand knowledge of how that all went. And then we welcomed them to our team at New Journey Housing. And yeah, we've been seeing anywhere from 100 to I think 250, 270 might have been our busiest month of clients that we saw. And they all do have to move out after that 30 days. And so far, it's been very successful of them finding housing after that time. Another support that we offer is rental workshops and trainings. We do those at the hotel in person. We also did them on Zoom and have it recorded on YouTube so people can watch it when it works for them. And that's also in Ukrainian. We did a series of those. We do those workshops ongoing and always new people. And we also, someone asked the last presentation about a letter. We offer like a kind of like a reference letter to our clients that outlines the supports they were given from the federal government, that they're newly arrived, and that they'll continue to be New Journey Housing clients. And people use that letter when they go and apply for apartments. We find sometimes that helps with landlords. But yeah, our spreadsheet of housing options is what really helped us connect our families to housing. Another program that we started with the Ukrainian arrivals was some volunteer drivers, which was new for us. We had folks that wanted to offer their time and their driving for our clients that maybe it was harder to get around using transit. We started just a WhatsApp group with the volunteer drivers, and then we put in the request of location and time, and then they would go pick up the family, take them to the viewing, and then bring them back to the hotel. It was really helpful for families with kids, especially that maybe it was harder to get by, or any folks with any disabilities. That was a really, really important piece that we added in. And the other thing that we started is just education around applications, leases, e-transfers. That was new, and setting up expectations of what apartments and housing is like in Winnipeg. I learned a lot as well of what folks were expecting. One of the big things was in-suite laundry was something that we had to really talk about with clients, because that's not as normal in our apartments, especially if you want something affordable. So just little things like that. And that's why it was so helpful to have Mikhailo and Lilia and Dasha on our team to kind of introduce that to us. And we also have been doing some pre-arrival support. So when families are booking their plane tickets and getting ready to come, they email us and reach out, and we can kind of give them an idea of what the housing is like, the housing market is like in Winnipeg, and what supports will be available to them. And if you want to go to the next slide, Mikhailo, that's just some statistics. So since, I believe, April, so we've met with over 1,700 households and helped them to find housing. Some have moved on, like they not in Winnipeg anymore. Some have gone to other provinces. Some have returned to Europe, but they can only stay at the hotel for 30 days. So they are all finding housing or options outside the hotel. Also, we've made referrals to other Manitoba communities. One of the, a really great thing with the settlement sector in Manitoba is that we were all talking to one another. We're all communicating and offering support. So if families said, hey, I've heard of Morden or Winkler or Gimli, which are communities outside of Winnipeg, we can connect them to a service provider here in the city that can support them to make that transition to other communities. And the next slide is just a map of Winnipeg, of where some families have settled. It's all over the place. It really depends on their budget. That determines a lot of the neighborhoods. Access to different schools or communities that they already know of, but it is all throughout the city. And the next slide is just some posters of workshops that we've done, which have all been translated into Ukrainian, information too about different benefits. We all know that they weren't eligible for many of the benefits because of their status, but teaching them about the 500 housing benefit that came out from the federal government, GST credit, and applying for that. We've been doing that a lot at our office because we have an access to benefit advisor. And then the workshop available online, and also the promoting of the workshops that we do at the hotel once every 2 weeks in person. And right now we are very busy because we also do income tax filing. So that we see access to benefits and having the financial stability as directly connected to housing. So that is how we're doing those services at our office. And now I will throw it over to Mikhailo, who will share a little bit about his own experience and some client experiences that he's seen as a housing advisor. Go ahead, Mikhailo.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mikhailo Ivanov. I'm a housing advisor at New Journey Housing. Thank you very much, Cody. As Cody has mentioned, basically all the information, I just want to share some challenging cases we have been dealing lately. One of them, it was a single lady. She came to Canada with a child with a very shortage of money, I would say, and she came pregnant. She came herself, and she found the room herself for $600. And when she got her baby a couple of months later, the landlord increased the rent up to $800, and she couldn't afford it. She came to us asking for help. She was asking any different organizations to help her to deal with the situation. And her intention was only to maybe to talk with the landlord and persuade him not to increase the price for rent, but we actually assisted her much more. We contacted all the subsidized housing organization. Because of the shortage of time, it might take considerable amount of time, but we did it quite fast. Less than 1 month, we found the subsidized housing for her, and we also reapplied for the government support. She has been rejected because upon arrival, she received that $3,000 for adults and $1,500 for children. And we reapplied on her behalf, and she was approved for that support as well. So she was extremely helpful, I would say. She couldn't find words to explain how grateful she was. Another cases might be, we have actually kind of hundreds of cases like this one, when the clients, we find housing for them. We explain how it works in Canada, the difference between Canadian and Ukrainian lease experience, and we find in housing for them. And lots of cases, let's say, we schedule a viewing. Our clients get to the viewing, they like the apartment, they applied, and afterwards they've been rejected because obviously they're newcomers, they have no work, they have no guarantor, no cosigner, and et cetera. So we also help them, we advocate for them, we talk to caretakers, landlord, property managers, and we try to persuade them and explain they're newcomers, but they have a sufficient amount of money, they have government support, and they're eager to work. We have several different organizations who help Ukrainians finding a job, and basically they will start working very, very soon. And the majority of cases we actually succeed, and many of clients, they got apartments after they were rejected initially. And I should also mention that I'm Ukrainian newcomer myself. I came to Canada July 2022, and New Journey Housing, I was also a client of New Journey Housing. They helped me a lot. They helped me find a place to settle down in Canada. And afterwards, they helped me find a job. Now I'm working for New Journey Housing and helping Ukrainian newcomers. Should you have any questions, please let me know.
Okay, great. Thank you, Cody and Mikhailo. So we do have a few questions already. It says, well, first there's a comment. It's a great initiative to recruit community members, counselors, and drivers. And then the other question is, do you screen volunteer drivers, criminal record check, liability insurance? How do you go about that?
Sure. Yeah, so we were very fortunate. That was all organized through another service provider in Winnipeg called Need Center, and NEEDS. They took on the role of screening all volunteers. So there was a lot of support from Manitobans saying, we want to help, we want to help. So it all went through them. And then when the volunteer said, I'm interested in driving, then they approved them that way and went through all the checks, like you said, and then they sent them to us. So New Journey Housing didn't have to do all that. Need Center did that. And that's part of the coordination that the province and the team at Manso was really good at organizing.
And then we have another comment that says such an inspirational story. So that's really great. And then, okay, another question. How are you able to persuade landlords to waive documentation requirements? Has this been a challenge? Is any documentation required or tracked by your organization?
So yeah, like I said at the beginning, there were a lot of landlords that reached out to us wanting to offer some of their units. By offer, like they're still collecting rent, but just saying, hey, we want to make some of these available to Ukrainians. But it really varies. You know, there was a comment about 4 months advance rent. Some landlords are asking for that. And we just make a note of that in our spreadsheet because we know some clients can do that, some clients can't. So it really depends on the resources that the family is bringing. So yeah, I was surprised by how much outpouring of support there was. But these were just private market landlords. Some were big companies, some were just like mom and pop shop sort of idea. So everyone was different. We just kept notes about it and then referred them that way, according to what the family could provide. And the documentation required or tracked by New Journey, no, there's not any that we're really tracking, I would say. The families just know that once they move into a unit, if they have any issues down the road, they can always come back to us. We're not closing any files or anything like that. So if there are any issues, or if they need help like mediating between the landlord, especially if language is a barrier, we can help them through those types of situations too.
Okay. And are the landlords that are supporting your program, do they reduce the rental fee, or is it like about the same as they would charge anybody, or like how does that work?
Again, some do, some don't. We had some where they waived the need for a deposit. We had some that offered 3 months free rent. We had it was just all different across the board. So we never said, okay, we'll only refer if you give us a discount. We didn't do anything like that. It was the landlords kind of presenting what they could offer.
And did you do any media, like promotion, something like that to kind of get the general members of the community on your side, and then specifically landlords who, would want to help?
I'd say back in March, there were a few news articles where we were one of the people interviewed, and we just kind of put a call out saying, hey, if you have housing units, let us know. And then that's when we got a lot of calls. We did not organize any host sharing situations. This is all separate standalone apartments. We didn't do anything like host matching. So leases, all that kind of stuff.
Like the full-blown lease, a normal, oh, okay, so it wasn't like a hosting model. Oh,
No,
okay.
not a hosting, no.
Oh, great. So we don't have any other questions. So thank you so much for joining us today and telling us about your model and your area. And then we have a comment that says, thank you for sharing these inspirational cases. Great experience. Thank you for sharing. So yeah, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Okay,
Yeah.
bye. Thank you. And I will now introduce our last speaker. We have Tanaz Pardiwala, Manager of Ukrainian Housing Host Program at Costi in Ontario. So I will pass it to you, Tanaz.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you, Bahar. Thank you very much. It's been very interesting listening to all the different models and different approaches. So Costi Immigrant Services, I will just say, is also based in Toronto, and it will, in a sense, be piggybacking off of the presentation that the City of Toronto did. So I actually, the last speaker just asked about, or there was mention of a host program, and that's exactly what this is going to be about. We at Costi started a Ukrainian housing host program, so slightly different model than what's been shared thus far. And just for those who may not be familiar with Costi, I'll just briefly highlight. We just celebrated our 70th anniversary in 2022. So a very well-established organization with a wide range of services: employment, education, settlement, skills training, social services, refugee services for all newcomers, immigrants, and refugees coming into the GTA. We have a staff of over 500, speaking more than 70 languages, a robust group of volunteers that support the work we do. We work from 17 different locations throughout the GTA and are funded from all 3 levels of government, the United Way, and various foundations. Our mission is to empower people from diverse communities to succeed and achieve their full potential by providing educational, employment, and social services, all with the objective of achieving a prosperous and inclusive Canada built on the success of every individual. I won't spend too much time on some of these slides because we've already touched on some of this in previous presentations, but specifically with regards to Ukrainians and QIT visa holders, the QIT visa was a program created by the Canadian government to allow for easy entry into Canada for displaced Ukrainians. It's a 3-year temporary. Sorry, of course, the Purolator guy comes right now during the presentation. It's a temporary 3-year visa with option for renewal, and it comes with the work permit and eligibility for a social insurance number, Ontario health insurance, and some financial support from the federal and provincial governments. The reason why we're all here today is talking about housing. So just highlighting that given Ukrainians are not arriving to Canada with quote unquote refugee status, there definitely are housing implications around that. I think the City of Toronto already mentioned some of these statistics, so I won't get too much into them, but I will say of the 132,000 Ukrainians that have already arrived in Canada, there is a significant proportion that have come to Ontario and the Toronto area. On average, roughly 200 to 400 daily arrivals at Toronto Pearson Airport. Quite a wide range, but a significant number every day, basically. Talking about the most pressing need that we have seen in terms has been accommodation, as everyone has mentioned. So in Toronto, we are fortunate enough that there is this significant Ukrainian community, and as such, many of the newcomer Ukrainian families have family, friends, acquaintances in Canada, in Toronto, and they've already made their connections and they have somewhere to stay when they land. But nonetheless, there are a proportion that have not made those connections, no friends, no family, and have not made arrangements as to where they will stay upon arrival. In Toronto, there are the 14-day federal government emergency accommodation available. It's a hotel program where they can register at the airport upon arrival. It was previously operated by Red Cross, and now it is carried out by QIS. So that is a huge relief for many of the Ukrainian newcomers that are arriving into Toronto. But as you can imagine, 14 days in a city like Toronto to think about what the next step might be, where they will live, identifying neighborhoods, identifying affordable housing. It's a Herculean task that often doesn't happen in 14 days. And that brings us to Costi's Housing Host Program. So this is first of all, I should mention the program, the host program, is new to Costi. Costi has not run a host program before. We have a reception center that receives refugees. We have a housing help division that helps people who are already settled in Toronto find affordable housing for themselves. In terms of a host program, this is a new project for Costi. And the idea was to be a bridge between the 14-day emergency accommodation and longer-term housing. The pillars of the program, it's a completely rent-free accommodation provided to Ukrainian families. the host family or the Canadian family receives no financial compensation or in-kind services. It is a completely voluntary program. It can be shared space or self-contained, such as a basement apartment in somebody's home. The length of stay varies. It can be something from 1 month to 1 year, dependent on the host's availability and the needs of the guest. On average, a host arrangement has been on average 2 to 3 months in general. Any additional support, such as meals or transportation, can be provided by the host, but that is completely at their own discretion. The main pillar of the host arrangement or agreement is this safe, warm, comfortable place where people can stay. Each Ukrainian newcomer family has a Costi settlement worker that is also assigned to them and will continue to work with them for the duration of the host agreement and even beyond, making sure that we continue to help and engage with them in terms of longer term permanent housing, if there's support required around employment search or language classes, getting children registered in school, etc. So I just wanted to take a quick second to draw a comparison to some other host programs internationally. There are incentive programs, specifically in Europe. For example, in the UK, there are thank you payments where they are providing £350 per month for the first 12 months, and then goes up to £500 for the second year. In Ireland, hosts are receiving right now €800 per month to have a Ukrainian family in their home. And in France, I believe it's €150. I just draw the comparison. I think there's pros and cons. It's not necessarily something we would look to do here. I think it just speaks, first of all, to the incredible generosity of the hosts that we have recruited, that there is absolutely no incentive, or at least financial incentive for them. It's purely out of the good nature of their heart. But we definitely have had some issues in terms of recruitment, in terms of meeting the demand or need for this type of model, a host model. So just some food for thought in terms of providing some compensation or incentive for hosts. Speaking about promotion and recruitment, we have tried a few different strategies. Early on in the initial few months, the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress was a huge help. Their landing page on their portal was a page where anyone across Canada could submit interest in helping Ukrainians arriving, whether it was housing or employment or financial help. And all of that information was filtered down to different organizations, including Costi. So we were able to contact people who would be open and available for hosting a family. In the fall, we had to take a more active approach with recruitment. So we turned to faith-based groups. And I just want to particularly highlight the Archdiocese of Toronto, all the way from the cardinal to the deacon to the pastors and all the parishioners. Really had an incredible response to this program and made a huge difference. The number of hosts that came through the Archdiocese of Toronto is incredible, so we greatly appreciate that. We did a webinar in partnership with Newcomer Center of Peel and volunteer Mississauga, Brampton, Caledon, which is Peel region, which also was fruitful in recruitment of hosts. The Toronto Public Libraries helped us in distributing or promoting our flyer and program information in all 102 branches. We did leaflet distribution at the Ukrainian Festival, annual festival in Toronto, which is quite a big deal, and directly to residences and businesses. And finally, we've done quite a bit of publicity on Toronto transit buses, subway platforms, and billboards throughout the city. And here you can just see some examples. The first one is a platform on the subway station, and below it's at the back of a TTC bus. Once somebody identifies as being interested as a host, we do have an onboarding process where we start with a very short interview over the phone. It's an assessment of the accommodation available. We do require everybody to have a vulnerable sector check, and Toronto City of Toronto already mentioned their involvement in helping Toronto Police Services provide those services for free, which is a huge help for our volunteer hosts. So thank you very much. Once somebody secures the vulnerable sector check, we go in person to the home to do a site visit with a very thorough checklist. And at that point, we are ready to match the family, the host family, with the Ukrainian family. We do have a written agreement, a host agreement, that's available in English and Ukrainian, signed by all three parties, the newcomer family, the host family, as well as Costi, and it outlines the duration of the agreement and stipulates all the other arrangements around the host agreement. As I mentioned, a settlement worker will continue to work with the family and sometimes can be a liaison between the host family and the Ukrainian family, especially if there's a language barrier. And finally, we do an exit interview upon the completion of the host arrangement. Kind of going fast, sorry about that. Just to give you some high level numbers from April to March, so just shy of a full year, we had contact with over 900 families that arrived in Canada during that time. 76 families have been placed, successfully matched with a host family. That's 168 people. During this duration of time, 57 hosts came forward and have successfully hosted, and many of them have re-hosted multiple times. As I said, the average length of stay is 2 to 3 months, but we've also had agreements that have been occasionally the host will say, please stay for 7 or 8 months for the duration of the school year. We've had hosts that said we would like them to stay for the full year. Just to put things in perspective, we have approximately been contacted by 120 hosts or interested hosts that considered having a family in their home. So when you look at 57 hosts and we've started the process with 120, that would mean roughly 1/3 end up with a family in their home, end up actually hosting. And that could be for a various number of reasons. Sometimes they have a room available in their home, but then at the point of matching, their teenage child from university comes home and the room is no longer available, or there's renovations that need to happen, or some kind of ailment or illness and they're no longer able. And sometimes they need the information, they start the process, but they do change their mind. There definitely is hesitancy and reluctance occasionally to invite people to share your space in your own home, people you don't know. But I can pause on a positive note, say that in the last week, there was a surge of interest around the time of the 1-year anniversary, and we were approached by 21 new families that expressed interest in hosting. So this is actually where I wanted to spend my time. I'm not sure how much time we have left, but I wanted to tell you what all of this means in real life for people. So a host, what does that mean? It can be anything from a spare bedroom, like I said, to a spare, to a space in the basement, a basement apartment, and sometimes even an entirely empty home. These are just a few examples of some of the homes where we have matched some of our clients. And some very specific examples I wanted to mention. I already spoke about the Archdiocese of Toronto. Through them, we were in touch with St. Gabriel's Church, which is in the East End of Toronto. That one church, raised $21,000 amongst their parishioners. And with that money, they went and leased and furnished a 2-bedroom apartment for 1 year, in which they hope to host a number of different Ukrainian families during the course of the year. At the present time, there's a family of 4, young couple with 2 children, including an autistic child. They moved in February, and they can stay there for 5 months to start, and longer if needed. This is a photo of the apartment, and I just put the picture of the meatballs because the clients were so grateful that they finally had a kitchen where they could prepare food for their children that suited their child's dietary needs. A second example, a retired nurse in Brampton. She had 2 spare bedrooms in her home first, and she was offering them to single women and couples. Over the span of 7 months, she hosted a total of 9 different families and counting. The last one went last week. And what I really like about this story also is she hosted, and she's hosted multiple times, but she also started a community of giving amongst her friends and neighbors. They were so inspired by her generosity and this expression of inviting newcomers into her home, but they themselves did not have the space to offer. So instead, they would donate food to her and to her guests. They provided toiletries and paper towel. They gave baskets to the guests once they found permanent housing for themselves and were ready to move out. So it just created a chain effect. We received a lot of donations from companies and community members, clothing, tickets to events. This on the bottom left is a donation we received of winter coats. And on the top left, actually, it's a photo of our staff, the host program staff, along with 13-year-old students from grade 8 students from a middle school in Toronto that took it upon themselves to fundraise for our program and donated books and Christmas presents for Ukrainian children. And last, my favorite story, if you'll indulge me for a moment, we had a single professional lady, Gurjeet. She offered a spare bedroom in her home. We matched her with a single pregnant Ukrainian lady. She was 8 months pregnant. When I called Gurjeet to ask her if she would be open to inviting Anna into her home, her reaction, she was a little bit hesitant. She wanted to help, but she told me, she said, Tanaz, honestly, I'm just not a baby person. I've never held a baby. I'm not fond of babies. I don't know anything about babies. I told her she didn't have to worry. Anna, it's her 3rd child. Her husband and 2 children were still in Europe. She came on her own. And I told her that Anna was an experienced mom and she didn't need to worry. So she agreed. Anna went to her home. She was 8 months pregnant. Went the beginning of December. She was due the end of December. But within 3 days of being in Gurjeet's home, she went into labor. And it was incredibly fast. And she ended up delivering the baby in Gurjeet's home. It was a home delivery. And it brought goosebumps to me. I was so elated. And here you can see some happy photos. And in speaking with Gurjeet, she couldn't get over how exciting this was. And she told me that she felt incredibly blessed to have a baby born in her home. So I will just want to say a very, very quick thank you to all our funders, IRCC, Province of Ontario, United Way, and all the collaboration with so many partners. I don't know if I have time, but Red Cross and QS for all their work they do at the airport, and then so many referrals back and forth between our 2 organizations. We already talked about the municipal governments, Peel, Durham, York, and Toronto, and then the organizations that are running those sites, Elizabeth Fry, Our Place Peel, Community Development Council Durham, Airbnb, OOSH, CCIS, and QS in Toronto, and then University of Toronto, OCASI for all their coordination work and helping us with donations, Archdiocese of Toronto, Newcomer Center of Peel, Toronto Public Libraries, Pattison, who I just want to say gave us a huge discount on all the promotion and advertising on the TTC, City of Toronto, Toronto Police Services, and then the donations from WestJet, Aritzia, Wexley, Don Valley Junior Middle School, Toronto Star, and Cavalia. And that's it from me. Sorry if it felt a bit fast.
Thank you. Thank you, Taz.
Tried to go as fast as I could.
No, that was great. No, we don't want to rush you. So we do have a few questions. Does Costi accept an application prior to landing?
So we do have an email address, housinghost@costi.org, in which we receive correspondence from people overseas as well as those who have landed in Toronto. You don't need to apply to our program. People contact us and they are then become part of our program. However, when they are still overseas, we give them the information that they need to, that can help them register at the airport for the 14-day hotel program. And then we ask them to get in contact with us once again after they've landed.
Okay, great. And do hosts have to reside in the Greater Toronto area? We have had many residents of our small town willing to host, but have received a very small number of referrals.
That's a great question, actually. So I would say the original thought around the program is that we would be working with hosts in the GTA, and they are by far the biggest number of hosts we have. However, we have accepted hosts from outside the GTA. We've had hosts up in Barrie, in Port Perry. So anyways, outside of the GTA, it is possible. Anyone and everyone that is offering space, we would like to take advantage of it. It can take a little bit more time because at the point of matching, we just have to make sure that the Ukrainian family is comfortable with whatever location they're at. We try not to put people into remote locations where they might not have access to public transit or have fewer opportunities for employment.
Okay, great. And then there was a comment that hotels currently accept only families with children. Where do single persons or couples without children go or get referred to?
Yeah, so also good question. This is a new development. I can't really speak. So at the airport, as I mentioned, it was prior, up until December, it was Red Cross who was operating this 14-day federal program. Right now it is QS. I don't know what the current situation is at the airport, but I do know the number of arrivals fluctuates every day. Costi, we are not at the airport ourselves. So I know that when the number of arrivals goes up, it can be more challenging for organizations to find hotel accommodation, but I think with some patience and hopefully everyone will get a hotel room. Our host program is small but mighty. If the numbers, you saw our numbers, like I mentioned, we are in contact with over 900 families, of which 76 have been with a host. I would love to have a higher number of hosts and a higher number of matches between Ukrainian families and host families. So hopefully we can recruit a lot more and find space for singles, for moms with kids, for everyone, really. Mm-hmm.
And do you have any arrangements with property managers or developers?
So we don't have any arrangements with developers. We don't have arrangements per se, but we do have some long established relationships with landlords throughout Toronto, not through this host program only, but given Costi's long history in settling refugees and newcomers. So we definitely have established relationships with landlords and property managers, and we try to tap into those relationships. Once somebody is with a host family, it is only a temporary solution. So we automatically start thinking about what next, and we do turn to those relationships with landlords and property managers to see if there's a suitable permanent residence for somebody, for a client.
Great, thank you. So those were all the questions we have, and I really wanted to say thanks for sharing, like the St. Gabriel's Church example. That was really cool, where they raised money and then they rented an apartment. That's very similar to like private sponsorship. So and I feel like that's like something groups can take on their own and kind of link up with an organization and make it happen. So that was a cool example. So thank you, Tanaz, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I just have some final, like 2 minutes, final comments to make to close us out for our webinar today. And just a reminder to please follow us on social media in Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. It's all at CISA-ACSE. So thank you, everyone. And thank you to our speakers from Success, New Journey Housing, Costi, and the City of Toronto for sharing your projects and initiatives and welcoming newcomer Ukrainian families. And thank you to our audience for joining us today. And we'll see you at the next one on March 20th. Thanks, everyone.